The story begins in the final, desperate years of the Second World War, when both the Allies and the Axis were racing to unlock any advantage that could turn the tide. Bombers filled the skies of Europe, and every flight was a deadly gamble. For Germany, the sight of American heavy bombers crossing the horizon had become a familiar and terrifying challenge. Each formation was a fortress of steel, bristling with guns, armored plating, and crews who had learned to survive the harshest skies on Earth. Among these machines, one stood out for an unexpected reason: the American B-24 Liberator. German intelligence officers had long studied Allied bombers. They measured their wingspans, examined their engines, and traced the patterns of their flight routes. But the B-24 presented a puzzle that no amount of distant observation could fully solve. Crews spoke about it with a strange mixture of irritation and respect. It wasn't the engines, it wasn't the bomb load, it wasn't even the speed. What caught their attention was something far less obvious, but far more important: the way the B-24 defended itself. The bomber carried a turret system unlike anything the Luftwaffe had ever encountered. Pilots who attacked formations of Liberators came back with stories that seemed almost unbelievable. They described streams of precise, stable fire coming from a rotating dome that never seemed to jam, never hesitated, and never slowed, no matter how chaotic the battle outside became. German fighters might find a way to slip beneath a B-17, but the B-24? That was different. Beneath it, waiting like a silent predator, was the Sperry ball turret. To understand why this mattered so deeply, you have to imagine what the air war looked like in those final years. Thousands of aircraft crowded the skies. Engine smoke curled into the cold wind. Flak burst like black flowers around formations. A single miscalculation could send a bomber spinning into a fall from which no crewman walked away. In this environment, every gun mattered. Every angle of coverage had the potential to save a crew or doom one. The Americans, anticipating the ferocity of intercepting fighters, had built their bombers with overlapping fields of fire so complex that the aircraft seemed alive with constant motion. But the ball turret was something else. It was compact, mechanically precise, and brutally effective. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a small sphere hanging beneath the fuselage. But inside that sphere sat a gunner curled into an almost fetal position, gripping twin, 50-caliber machine guns and scanning the sky for any hint of movement. Every second inside that glass bubble carried the weight of life or death. German pilots learned to respect that bubble. Some even whispered that the Americans had created a near-perfect defensive weapon. But in the chaos of war, rumors run faster than truth. The Luftwaffe wanted answers. And so, when the opportunity arose, they seized it. Deep within occupied territory, a damaged B-24 crash-landed almost intact. Most aircraft that fell behind German lines broke into pieces or burned, offering little more than scavenged aluminum. But this one, a battered Liberator, with its wings torn and engines silent, was a rare prize. Engineers rushed to the site. Tools were brought in. By nightfall, the aircraft had been transported to a hidden airfield, where German technicians, mechanics, and officers gathered around it like archaeologists around a newly discovered ruin. The first thing they wanted to examine was the turret. At that time, the Luftwaffe's own defensive engineering was advanced, but not flawless. German fighters, unlike American bombers, were built for speed and climbing power, not heavy defensive turrets. Their own bombers carried weapon systems that were functional, but often complex, prone to jamming, and difficult to maintain. The Sperry turret, by contrast, was rumored to be shockingly simple to operate, able to rotate smoothly in all directions, and powerful enough to lay down a curtain of fire that made many pilots think twice before committing to an attack. German officers approached the turret the way a scientist handles a rare artifact. They touched the smooth metal, traced the welds with their fingers, and examined the mechanical linkages that allowed the gunner to control his movement. To them, this was not merely an enemy's weapon, it was a blueprint of American industrial thinking, precise, efficient, and mass-producible. What surprised them most was not the technology itself, but the elegance of its design. The Americans had created a mechanism that combined hydraulics, electric motors, and manual controls in a way that allowed even a moderately trained gunner to fight with deadly accuracy. The controls responded with ease. The interior layout was tight but perfectly organized. From the position of the firing triggers to the placement of the sighting system, everything made sense. As the Germans studied it deeper, the truth became harder to ignore. The turret wasn't just well designed, it was designed with a level of manufacturing discipline that Germany, at that stage of the war, simply could not match. Factories back home were shattered by bombing raids. Skilled labor was dwindling. Raw materials were limited. Production lines struggled to keep pace with demands. Even if they copied the turret piece by piece, they would never produce it in the quantities needed to change the course of the skies. Yet the officers continued their inspection. They wanted to know how it rotated so smoothly in freezing air. They wanted to understand how the motors took commands from the gunner instantly, without lag or hesitation. They wanted to know why, despite its cramped interior, the turret rarely malfunctioned. Every answer brought a new layer of respect. By the time they finished their initial examination, one thing had become clear. This small sphere of metal hanging beneath the B-24 was more than a defensive tool. It was a symbol of American industry, an industry that could build thousands upon thousands of identical mechanisms, each one as reliable as the last. The Germans knew innovation when they saw it. They knew brilliance when it presented itself right in front of them. And on that day, standing beneath the silent, broken Liberator, surrounded by the quiet hum of tools and the distant rumble of war, they faced a truth that none of them had expected. Even the Luftwaffe, with all its expertise and engineering pride, could not easily match what the Americans had accomplished. They would test it, of course. They would power it up. They would sit inside it. They would rotate it, fire it, push it, until it groaned. But already, the first seeds of realization were taking root. This turret was something different, something special, something that might hold the secret to why B-24 formations were so difficult to break apart. And in the days that followed, that revelation would only grow deeper, leading to confessions and conclusions few expected. The Luftwaffe officers were meticulous in their approach. They didn't want just a cursory glance, they wanted to understand every facet of the B-24's ball turret. In the early morning light, technicians began their work, carefully connecting power sources, lubricating moving parts, and testing the electrical systems that controlled the turret's rotation. The sound of motors humming to life filled the hangar. It was an almost mechanical heartbeat, steady and precise, as if the machine itself had come alive. One by one, engineers climbed into the small sphere, squeezing into the confined space where the American gunners had risked their lives. The gunner's position was tight, forcing the body into an awkward curl. Every movement had to be deliberate. Yet, despite the discomfort, the Germans immediately noticed the intuitive nature of the controls. Levers and triggers responded instantly. The turret rotated smoothly, almost effortlessly, and the sighting system offered a clear, unhindered view of the sky outside. "This is exceptional," one officer muttered under his breath. It was more than just mechanical admiration. It was the acknowledgement that the Americans had created a weapon that combined deadly effectiveness with simplicity, a rare and dangerous combination in the machinery of war. They began simulations, rotating the turret through arcs of fire, testing its ability to track fast-moving objects, and checking the synchronization of its twin 50-caliber guns. The Germans, despite their expertise, struggled to push the turret to its limits. No matter how aggressively they tested, it never jammed, never hesitated, and never faltered. Even under conditions that would have crippled most German systems, the B-24's turret functioned flawlessly. Then came the moment that would leave them truly unsettled. They fired live rounds. Carefully, in a secured test range, the guns roared to life. The sound was deafening, echoing off the hangar walls and into the open sky outside. Shells cut through the air with an almost eerie precision. Every burst hit its intended mark with the reliability of a metronome. Engineers and officers alike felt a mix of awe and unease. For years, German industry prided itself on precision engineering. Messerschmitt and Heinkel had produced aircraft that were marvels of speed and performance. But here, inside a humble sphere beneath a battered bomber, lay a different kind of genius. This wasn't about maximum speed or altitude, it was about survival. It was about giving a single gunner the power to protect an entire formation, to turn the skies into a death trap for any fighter that dared approach. The officers debated quietly among themselves, scribbling notes, tracing mechanical diagrams, and comparing the B-24 turret to their own designs. They were honest with one another. They recognized that duplicating this system wasn't simply a matter of copying blueprints. German production lines were strained to the breaking point. Skilled labor was scarce. Electrical components of this sophistication were difficult to mass produce. And most importantly, the Americans had perfected the integration of all these elements into a single, cohesive, and operationally simple system. Some of the engineers suggested modifications, ways they might adapt the concept to German aircraft. Others shook their heads. "It is more than technology," one senior officer said. "It is the sum of design, production, and operational thinking. We cannot replicate the philosophy behind it." The reality was sobering. The Luftwaffe had dominated the skies early in the war, leveraging superior aircraft and training. But the B-24 represented a shift. American bombers were no longer just payloads. They were fortified platforms, turning every crewman into a deadly deterrent. Every formation became a moving fortress, each turret a sentinel that could cover a vast arc of sky. For German pilots, attacking these bombers was no longer simply a test of skill. It had become a calculated risk against a mechanical adversary that almost seemed alive in its efficiency. And then there were the stories from the crews themselves. Pilots who had returned from missions against B-24 formations described what they called the bubble of fire. German fighters would approach from above, only to be met with precise bursts that seemed impossible for a single gunner to deliver. They tried attacking from the rear, from the sides, from beneath, but the ball turret tracked them no matter what. Some pilots admitted later that even when they managed to evade the guns, the psychological impact lingered. The knowledge that a lethal eye was always trained on them, that a small sphere below a bomber could so effectively cover vast skies, left a mark that no technical manual could explain. The Germans tested variations, attempting to force mechanical failures by overloading the motors, rapidly switching firing angles, and even attempting unconventional maneuvers. Nothing worked. The turret was resilient. It responded like a living organism, as if designed with an instinct for survival built into its very gears and circuits. By now, the officers began recording their findings with an unusual tone of respect. Diagrams were labeled with careful annotations. Notes included observations about ergonomics, sighting precision, and operational simplicity. At one point, a German engineer, normally blunt and skeptical, looked at his colleagues and said something that would later be recounted in whispers. "Even we cannot make this, not in the time we have left." It was a confession that carried the weight of reality. The war was turning against Germany, resources were dwindling, and even the finest engineers and pilots were limited by circumstance. The B-24's ball turret was not just an enemy weapon, it was a statement, a testament to industrial efficiency and design philosophy that Germany could neither steal nor reproduce under the pressures of a collapsing war effort. In the quiet moments after testing, the officers lingered near the turret, examining the curvature of the sphere, the precision of the control mechanisms, the smoothness of the rotation. They discussed what it would mean if they could deploy a similar system, knowing full well it was impossible. Each round fired, each mechanical movement tested, confirmed the truth. The Americans had achieved a level of defensive capability that German forces could not touch. This realization was more than a technical defeat, it was a psychological one. For decades, Germany had prided itself on engineering supremacy. Tanks, aircraft, submarines, all were fields in which German ingenuity had set standards for the world. Yet here, under the dim hangar lights, amid the smell of gunpowder and oil, officers admitted something they would never put in an official report. The Allies had built something that even the finest German minds could not replicate, a combination of design, industrial skill, and practical usability that was simply beyond reach. And so the turret remained a silent testament to innovation. Even as the war raged outside, with dogfights tearing through the clouds and entire cities under bombardment, a single sphere beneath a battered bomber spoke volumes. It was a reminder that brilliance often lies not in size or complexity, but in the thoughtful integration of skill, technology, and purpose. The Germans would study it, They would marvel at it, and they would try to learn from it. But deep down, they knew the truth. This was something uniquely American, something that had changed the rules of air combat, something that, for a brief moment in history, had shown the limits of even the most formidable military minds. The days of testing stretched on, and with each passing hour, the Luftwaffe officers came to a quiet, unspoken realization. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a masterclass in practical engineering, a machine that combined lethal efficiency with simplicity, and it had reshaped the air war in a way that Germany could not counter. Every test, every rotation of the turret, every burst of gunfire confirmed the same inescapable truth. The Americans had built something extraordinary, and the Germans were powerless to copy it. What haunted the officers most was not the turret itself, but what it represented. They had always believed that superior tactics, training, and machinery could tilt the balance of war, but here, beneath the shadow of a battered Liberator, they confronted a form of ingenuity that was almost philosophical. The Americans had understood the human element as much as the mechanical. A single gunner, confined to a tiny sphere, became capable of covering an entire sector of sky. He could rotate, track, and fire with precision, and he could do it repeatedly without fatigue or error, thanks to thoughtful design and flawless execution. The implications were staggering. Entire formations of B-24 seconds, thousands of pounds of steel and aluminum, could fly into the heart of Europe and emerge battered but intact. German fighters might achieve a kill here and there, but the cumulative effect of the Liberator's defensive turrets was clear. The balance had shifted. The Americans had found a way to survive in numbers, to multiply the effectiveness of each gunner through intelligent design, and the Germans could do nothing to recreate it. In hushed conversations among the officers, phrases like "beyond our capability" and "a marvel of engineering" began to circulate. Even their bravest pilots, who had faced the worst of Allied bombers day after day, acknowledged the psychological impact. Attacking a B-24 was no longer a simple engagement of skill and courage. It was a confrontation with a machine that almost seemed alive in its defensive capacity. One officer later recorded in his private notes that the turret was a guardian of the sky, a mechanism that elevates man to the level of instinctive lethality. This admission was both professional and personal. For the Germans, who prided themselves on technical mastery and the elegance of their machinery, acknowledging the superiority of an enemy system cut deep. It was a bitter pill. A small sphere beneath a bomber could embody more tactical ingenuity than years of German effort. It was a lesson in humility, one that many engineers carried with them long after the war ended. But it was also a story of American resourcefulness. The B-24, often overshadowed in popular memory by the B-17, was in many ways the perfect expression of industrial wartime thinking. It didn't just carry bombs, it carried survival. Every turret, every gun, every piece of armor was integrated into a system that allowed crews to endure unimaginable odds. And the ball turret, that tiny, spinning sphere of steel, was the heart of that system. It represented not just a technological achievement, but a philosophy. That even in the chaos of war, thoughtful design could protect human life, maximize efficiency, and change the rules of engagement. By the end of their tests, the Luftwaffe officers had come to a reluctant conclusion. They could document it, analyze it, and try to apply fragments of its principles elsewhere, but true replication was impossible. German factories could not match the American capacity for precise, mass-produced mechanisms. Even if they could, the training, ergonomics, and integration into a full defensive system were beyond them. This turret was not just a weapon, it was a lesson in ingenuity, resilience, and the power of combining human skill with mechanical perfection. The Liberator's ball turret had quietly rewritten the rules of aerial combat, and as the officers finally stepped back, leaving the damaged B-24 inches its hangar, they understood something profound. Some innovations are not merely technical, they are cultural, industrial, and philosophical, reflecting the values and capabilities of the society that produced them. The Americans had created more than a defensive weapon. They had created a symbol of ingenuity that even the most accomplished minds of the Luftwaffe could not replicate. In the end, The story of the B-24's turret is not just a story of guns and gears. It is a story of respect earned in the most unlikely way, through quiet observation, hands-on testing, and the sober recognition of brilliance in an enemy. It is a reminder that in war, as in life, mastery is rarely about brute force alone. Sometimes it is about vision, precision, and the courage to design something that changes the game entirely. As the war raged on, and as skies over Europe remained filled with bomber formations and fighter intercepts, that small sphere beneath the B-24 continued to spin silently, unseen and unheralded by the public. Yet for those who faced it, for those who studied it, and for those who survived because of it, the ball turret stood as a testament. A single, well-designed mechanism could define outcomes, protect lives, and leave even the fiercest adversaries in awe. Even today, decades later, engineers, historians, and aviation enthusiasts reflect on that tiny sphere and the lessons it holds. The Luftwaffe officers who admitted defeat in understanding it serve as a reminder that innovation cannot always be copied. It must be experienced, appreciated, and respected. The B-24's ball turret remains a symbol of ingenuity that transcended its time, a quiet guardian of the skies, and a story of brilliance that even enemies could not deny.